Welcome to Living Legacies, an initiative of the Canadian Churches of Christ Historical Society. This interview is the very first in what we hope will become a treasure trove whereby leaders and other significant members of the Canadian Churches of Christ can be interviewed for the purpose of preserving first-hand conversations where we can hear from them what their lives, challenges, triumphs, and views have been. My name is Hibbard, and I am currently the chairman of the board of directors for the CCCHS. With us today is Dr. Jeffrey Ellis. Geoff has graciously agreed to be the first interview, and apart from the whole guinea pig aspect, he seems like an obvious first choice, not only with his visible and far-reaching work within the Ontario Brotherhood, but also because of his being key to the very existence of the Canadian Churches of Christ Historical Society. But let me stop there and let Geoff tell his own story. Geoff, welcome, and thank you so much for being the first participant in Living Legacies.
It is a high honor to be invited to share my memories in this manner.
Geoff, who were your first ancestors to become involved in the Restoration movement?
My ancestors were of the Ellis and Patterson families, and George and Lucy Ellis arrived from England to Meaford in 1853 and became members of the Meaford Church of Christ in 1858. The Smithville Church of Christ began meeting in 1865 with its meeting house built in 1870, where logs supporting the floor were drawn from the Tallman farm bush, that's Evergreen Hill Farm on Yonge Street northwest of Smithville. Members of both Ellis and Patterson families shared in the early life of the Smithville congregation. Two sons of Oliver and Electa Tallman, parents of my grandmother, Cherry Allura Tallman Ellis, were Ora Hibbard, that's O.H. Tallman, and Osro Ellis, that's O.E. Tallman. Both studied at Carmen Bible School. O.H. studied at Beamsville Bible School, and both studied, graduated from, and taught at Potter Bible School in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and both shared in founding and teaching at the Maritime Bible and Literary College in West Gore, Nova Scotia. That was 1909 through 1915.
Were your parents members of the Church of Christ?
Well, my parents, William Howard and Mary Secord Patterson Ellis, were married September 30, 1928, by Henry McCurley, preacher with the Bathurst Street Church of Christ in Toronto. And that reminds us of Oldham Bible School in McCurley Hall. My brother David was born March 25, 1930. I was born September 17, 1931, in a nursing home in Grimsby, and our earliest home was in Smithville. My father was baptized by his uncle, O.H. Tallman, in Meaford on September 16, 1917, age 14. My mother was baptized in Lake Ontario by Henry McCurley in 1922. My father gave up his faith while studying art in New York City in the late 1920s. My mother was a steadfast Christian throughout her life, and I attribute to her steady influence both my introduction to and continuance in the faith in Christ. I actually have memories at about age 4 of attending church services at Smithville, my grandfather Ellis preaching and observing, "Only God can make a tree."
What was worship like in the churches of your youth?
Well, our family moved to Grimsby when I was ready for kindergarten, living there until 1939. We had an idyllic time in those early years, living on a 4-lot property that included an orchard on Patton Street. I remember only one conversation about the Depression when my father was temporarily out of work. When I remember making an unwelcome and uninformed suggestion. The only drawback in those days was the absence of a Church of Christ in Grimsby. So it was not until we moved to Bartonville, then a suburb of Hamilton, that my mother, my brother, and I went to church regularly. Alex Fisher, a barber in Hamilton, dropped by one day and invited us to attend the activities of the Sanford Avenue Church of Christ in downtown Hamilton, offering transportation. We gladly accepted. Brother Fisher continued this service for the 3 years we lived in that area. In addition, Brother Fisher made it possible for David and me to attend Alma Bible School for 2 summers in 42 and 43. The Sanford Avenue Church of Christ Meeting House had originally been an Orthodox church. The auditorium was open to the roof, resulting in a dark, cavernous space above. Perhaps to offset this somewhat, a 4x8 plywood sign had been suspended with the message painted, "One Lord, one faith, one baptism." Seeing it weekly, these values became fixed in my mind. Somehow, when the building ceased to be used by the church, that sign fell into my possession, housed for a time in storage at the Waterloo Church, then in the attic of the McCurley Hall at Alma, where it disappeared. In those days, Sanford did not support full-time preachers. Lemuel Keffer was one who preached from time to time, and he baptized my brother David. A couple of decades went by, and the congregation invited a young preacher from Ohio to serve full-time, Max Craddock, who would become a lifetime friend of mine. And Max later joined the Great Lakes staff as Dean of Boys. He helped to start the Grimsby Church of Christ. He went on to preach for the Strathmore Church of Christ, where he became producer and preacher for the Canada-wide TV program Key to the Kingdom. He also became chairman of the Gospel Herald Board, as well as the magazine's publishing editor.
Please describe your experience of baptism.
Of course, I was oblivious in those early days to the rich spiritual heritage that I was privileged to have in my family. My mother and the Hamilton congregation's influences were precious to me, and the importance of Alma in this regard also became a major influence. By 42 and 43, Alma was well on his way to becoming a summer Bible school. This was the vision of the then director Raymond Crumless, an American who was preaching for the Strathmore congregation at the time. And it was in July 1943, when almost 12, that I was baptized by Brother Crumless in the 16-Mile Creek. Maturing in life and in faith was before me.
Who were your mentors in the church? Please describe their influence on you.
Well, in August of that year, 1943, my family moved from Hamilton to the east of Toronto. My mother immediately took my brother and me to church, to the Strathmore Boulevard Church of Christ. we could access it by streetcar. Here was a young, vibrant church with a large group of young people. Jack McElroy from Chattanooga, Tennessee, was influencing the congregation in those days. He had preached briefly for Strathmore for just 6 weeks, and then from Tennessee, he recommended a series of preachers whom he recruited and trained and then recommended for service at Strathmore. Raymond Crumless was the first of these men, serving from 40 to 43, who returned to the U.S. in the same August that we arrived in Toronto. But he was followed by Charles Lemons from 43 to 46, by Ernie Fletcher in 47, and by T.J. Mitchell, 47 through 50. And these were good men who blessed the congregation and exerted a significant shaping influence, if unrecognized at the time, upon my life.
Tell us about your personal decision to become a preacher.
My decision to pursue a Christian ministry, however unclear at the time, was shaped by the influences that converged from family and church, especially the preachers at Strathmore. Near the end of my high school days, I distinctly recall one sunny day while walking up Coxwell Avenue, just south of Danforth Avenue, with Strathmore a block farther up, stopping and saying to myself, I will be a preacher. I will attend Abilene Christian College. Now, the choice of ACC was the result of another influence. My favorite uncle, Gerald Ellis, had attended ACC 35 through 37, followed by 2 years at George Pepperdine College, graduating in 40. To make the decision was one thing. To carry through would require the Lord's blessing. There is a composite picture today displayed in the entranceway of the Strathmore Church that marks the 40th anniversary of the church in '64. It contains, along with pictures of members and events of the congregation's history, photos of 9 men who had gone out from Strathmore to preach the gospel, and I am privileged to be included in that collection. As the Second World War drew to a close, a growing number of Canadian young people were looking to American Christian colleges for their continuing education. Some suggested as many as 100 were included. One outstanding Canadian elder who aided in securing border crossing requirements and supplied college admission counsel for many of these young people, including me, was Alexander Lynn Whitelaw of the Fern Avenue congregation in Toronto. Upon his retirement, he moved to Beamsville and contributed his services to the business office at GLCC. My wife, Doreen, and I named our second child after him, Rebecca Alyn Ellis.
Please talk about your educational experiences. Did you have favorite professors or instructors who inspired you? Please describe how they inspired you.
I traveled by bus to Abilene for college in the fall of 1950. My uncle and Aunt Billy and Dorothy Ellis helped finance that first year of school. There was only one other Canadian at the college that year, and Roy Merritt had graduated the previous May, leaving a highly regarded record I had determined to enroll as a freshman in order to gain 4 years of Bible study, even though my senior matric, that's grade 13, qualified me for the sophomore year. The first Bible class I enrolled in was Corinthians, the 2 letters studied in 2 semesters, taught by R.C. Bell. These were to be his last classes in his long teaching career. I had learned that his first teaching was in 1908 in the new Western Bible and Literary College in Odessa, Missouri, in his opening year. A fellow teacher was my great uncle, O.E. Tallman. I was warned that as a freshman I could not receive the senior credit that this class accorded, and that was okay by me. Well, at the end of the first year at college, the realities of funding a college education had become all too real. One day I was having a conversation with W.R. Smith, vice president and in charge of the scholarship program. I said, "Brother Smith, I don't think I can return next year. I don't have enough money." He responded, "Well, why don't you apply for a foreign student scholarship?" And I responded, "Well, Brother Smith, it wouldn't do any good. You folks don't think that Canadians are foreigners." He looked at me and said, "Why don't you apply anyway?" Abilene awarded me a full tuition and fees scholarship for the next 3 years. Well, to cover daily living costs while at college was another matter. For 3 summers, I served as sports director at OMA, 1950 through 52. The summer of 53, we stayed at Abilene, and I worked for a Mr. Cheatham, a painter. The first year at school, I developed film at Abilene Camera. The next year, I worked as a clerk in the office of Abilene Paper and Rags. My junior year, I preached at a little church in Truscott, Texas. This town was 100 miles due north of Abilene, this occasioning a 200-mile round trip every Sunday, for which I was given $25. $5 for gas, $5 for food, $10 saved for rent, and $5 for miscellaneous. In my senior year, I preached at Herndon Chapel, a country congregation outside of Anson, 20 miles north of Abilene. I felt that I was privileged to be in a golden age of Bible teachers at Abilene during my years of study there. The names of these renowned men still vibrate in my mind: Charles Robertson, Paul Southern, Lemoyne Lewis, John P. Lewis, Frank Pack, J.D. Thomas, J.W. Roberts, Woodrow Wilson. In my 4th year at college, ACC offered the Masters in Bible for the first time. So I checked with Dean Adams and found that I still had 36 credits available from my grade 13 studies. Thus, I enrolled in the MA program as well, completing my senior year requirements, graduating May 1954 with my BA and in August with my MA. I was the first student to receive an MA degree in Bible from Abilene. Number 2 to graduate that summer with his MA in Bible was Everett Ferguson, a college friend. Everett went on to earn a doctorate at Harvard Divinity School, became a noted American historian, a teacher at ACU, and was a frequent guest teacher at Great Lakes Bible College in later years.
With your college years behind you and the challenge of full-time service before you, what thoughts about a career and possibilities for service did you have?
While at Abilene, I was visited in the summer of '53 by Bruce Merritt and Keith Thompson, who were recruiting for staff at the newly founded Great Lakes Christian College. Later, the new president of GLCC, C.G. McPhee, also dropped by to encourage me in that direction. Then, late in my last year, a congregation in Hartford, Connecticut, wrote me to report that my application to preach for them had been declined. They had found a man who would preach full-time and bring his support with him. I was looking for support and preaching part-time while I would study in a graduate program in a nearby seminary. Well, the very next day after that letter's arrival, I received a letter from C.G. McPhee strongly urging me to join the GLCC staff. He wrote, "Your MA in Bible would be helpful in the college program." Well, this message from on high was clear. My wife Doreen and our new baby daughter Beth arrived in Beamsville in late August 1954, ready to serve at GLCC.
Do you remember your first sermon? What were your thoughts about preaching as a career?
I well remember what I consider my first sermon, delivered during the Christmas break of my first year at college in 1950 at the Strathmore Boulevard Church. I can't remember the text or topic, but I do remember one reaction from one of my friends of the Strathmore gang. "Well, that wasn't much." I was very conscious at the end of my college days, as the end of my college days drew near, of two personal difficulties. One, of feeling totally unfit for overseas missionary work. I sensed that I did not have the emotional stamina that exposure to different cultures would require. And two, of feeling immature and unready for the demands of full-time ministry at that stage in my life. The prospect of serving in a Christian school and working with congregations part-time was appealing. GLCC in Canada seemed like a good fit. In those early years at Great Lakes, I taught Bible, history, phys ed, coached, and supervised the boys' residence. On Sundays, I preached for a time first at Ivan Avenue in Hamilton, then at Niagara and Manning in St. Catharines, and then at the newly established church in Ajax. After that, I frequently would be speaking somewhere on Sunday until becoming an elder at Beamsville required attention to local matters. My sermons were probably too long, generally textual. Not having a daily interaction with members, I suspect my lessons were more general than responsive. Marriage services, funeral services became numerous.
What would you like to share about your family?
I would like to talk about my wife, Doreen. She was truly a gift from heaven. She responded with grace and warmth to support my varied efforts to serve our Lord no matter what. Without her, much of what I am reporting here would not have happened. I met my future wife at high school. Doreen Begley was of an Irish family that had fled Ireland during the potato famine and settled in Cabbagetown in the center of Toronto. And through the dedication of her aunt, Doreen was introduced to the Catholic faith as a youth. When we began dating, she met the young people at Strathmore. She was embraced by them, and she quickly embraced the gospel. She was baptized August in 1950 at Bayview, as the baptistry at Strathmore was down at the time. When I went off to college, she remained in Toronto, got a job at an office of Imperial Oil, and saved money so that she could also study at Abilene. We wrote every day, postage 3 cents. After 2 years, Doreen came to Abilene, enrolling in the freshman year, studying Bible under Lemoyne Lewis. We were married that December 27 in 52 at the Strathmore Church. The next school year, Doreen worked in the ACC business office to help finance our final year at Abilene. Our first child, daughter Elizabeth, was born February 25, 1954, at St. Anne's Hospital in Abilene, the last night of the Abilene lectures. Our second daughter, Rebecca, June 26, 56, and son Jeffrey Mark, July 24, 58, were born in Grimsby. I could fill the rest of this report telling of her gracious, generous, unstinting support of every twist and turn of my efforts to serve the church, the school, and a variety of callings along the way, and specifically our Lord. Always pleasant, generous, helpful, engaging, and warm-spirited. She is remembered by a host of girls she coached at GLCC and many others. She retired from teaching at Great Lakes when a more qualified teacher in phys ed was hired, just in time to become an employee at a local bank and thus able to finance our 3 children as they headed off to college, the oldest to Lipscomb and the next 2 to Harding. She was a gracious hostess for the numerous visitors to the college, and later her place in the Waterloo congregation was important in its own contribution and was a significant adjunct as I attempted to serve as an evangelist and also an elder for several years. We decided to downsize January 2019. Shortly after this decision, on February 23rd, she fell and broke her left leg, and this resulted in her premature passing September 4, 2021, 4 months short of our 70th wedding anniversary. Now she is rejoicing in heaven. She is heaven's gift.
Could you share any visions that might have influenced you while you were at Great Lakes Christian College?
I believe the vision that informed me during my days at GLCC was drawn from that which motivated its founders, specifically Oliver Tallman and George Johnson, leading promoters of the Ontario School in the late 40s, and Charles G. McPhee, GLCC's first president. Admittedly, this was somewhat old-fashioned in that it reached back into the 19th century when institutions would provide for high school studies, which in turn would feed into the college-level courses. This was the pattern familiar to Oliver, whose father and uncle had founded and served Maritime Bible and Literary College, and where he was born. This was the experience of George Johnson, who studied at Carmen Bible School in Manitoba. And this was the definitive experience of C.G. McPhee, who had studied on both levels and graduated from Maritime Bible and Literary College, and who then went on to take his final 2 years of college at Nashville Bible School. But the boldness of their vision is clearer when it is linked with that of the school to be serving young people from both sides of the border in the Great Lakes Basin. However, when the well-known American preacher publisher they were attempting to recruit to lead as president declined the invitation, the founders were required to fall back on local talent. C.G. McPhee, leading preacher in Canada, was their man. The more modest operation was now in the offing. And it was a shock to me when, in the second month of my time at Great Lakes, C.G. McPhee stepped down from his office as president, having served 4 years in that role. While an increasingly impractical goal, I persisted throughout my years at Great Lakes in striving for GLCC to be a college in function as well as in name, while maintaining an outstanding high school.
Please name some of the leading people at Great Lakes with whom you worked.
2 sets of brothers, well qualified for their roles, gave the burgeoning institution its powerful heads up in the early years. Roy and Bruce Merritt, and Eugene and Donald Perry. All 4 had received or were about to receive their graduate degrees. That 4 young men who had grown up in the neighborhood of the future GLCC with substantial academic preparation in place and willing to devote their lives to this visionary effort is truly remarkable. Bruce Merritt was the founding principal, becoming as well acting president in '54, officially president in '58. He determined to resign August 1960. When it was settled that I should succeed him, the difficulty of making staff adjustments with school opening the next month prompted me to encourage Bruce to continue for an additional year. Thus, I completed my 7th year of teaching while serving as an assistant to the president and learning as much as I could about the new responsibility. Roy Merritt, with Keith Thompson, taught college Bible classes in night school during the first 2 years of the college's operation, '54 through '56. Roy then taught New Testament Greek in distance learning to college Bible students in '61 through '63, and then he joined the Great Lakes staff in '69, eventually to serve as dean of the college level faculty or school of Bible and missions, and he continued in this role until 1980, when Roy and Nell then left for service in Bangalore, India. Eugene Perry, having completed 2 years teaching at Radville Christian College in Saskatchewan, became Great Lakes' first teacher in the opening year, 1952, second principal in 1958, a post he would hold for 13 years until 1971. And he continued to teach for 3 years, 71 through 74, when Eugene and Evelyn Perry left for Zambia, where Eugene served as headmaster of Namoyanga Christian School. Eugene returned to serve GLCC for 2 more years in 83 through 85, serving the school 24 years in all. And Donald Perry came to Great Lakes in '58, a teacher of science, after having earned his MS at the University of Toronto. He served in this capacity until he and Miriam and their family departed for mission work in Shillong, Assam, India, August '63. When he completed his work there, he returned and served Great Lakes again for 6 years, 79 through 85. Walter Dale, another young man from the Strathmore Boulevard congregation's 9 young preachers, was an early teacher of note at GLCC in Bible and history, and he was a mentor to me. Finally, among many others who dedicated a few or many of their years to service at GLCC, with whom I had the pleasure to serve, I will remember one other, Edwin Broadus. Ed has now reached 92 years, and which I will shortly, and we are still in weekly contact. We were friends, Edwin a junior and me a freshman, at ACC in 1950. He had also been a friend of Roy Merritt at Abilene. Having preached for 21 years in Midwest USA, Ed came to Beamsville in '75 to serve as Bible teacher under Roy Merritt, then Dean of Faculty of Bible and Missions. Ed became Dean of the Bible in 1981, and then Dean of the College in 1983. And upon my resignation from the office in 1984, he was selected as president, serving for 7 years. One of the accomplishments for which Ed as president is well remembered was receiving in 1987 the provincial charter for Great Lakes Bible College, one of 12 charters granted by the Ontario Provincial Legislature. We think of the letters patent under which both high school and college divisions had previously operated. But this resulted in the 2 divisions becoming legally separate institutions. The GLCC board chose to operate both schools for the time, but in '93, severe financial conditions resulted in the suspension of the Bible College operation. Ed went on to become deeply involved in researching and writing about the Restoration movement in Canada, publishing a trio of books through the Gospel Herald Foundation, which I was privileged to serve as editor. How the Disciples Came Together in Early Ontario, written in 2007, How the Disciples Grew in Early Ontario in 2014, and Why the Disciples Divided in Ontario at the close of the 19th century, 2018.
Please share some of your memories of your years as president of Great Lakes, and how did you get along in your fundraising responsibilities?
Well, by way of initiation in 1956, Bruce Merritt invited me to accompany him during his summer fundraising travels in Tennessee and Texas. Thinking that that would be an experience, I accepted. But I had failed to factor in that my second child was about to be born in the middle of June that year. My family has never ceased reminding me of that lapse of parental responsibility. Upon our return home from an eye-opening experience, I said to Bruce, I wouldn't touch your job with a 10-foot pole. I began my new role as president in 1961, facing a steep learning curve in both administration and fundraising. The time came the next summer in 1962 for me to spend the time raising funds for GLCC, and Texas was my target. I would take my family with me, planning on leaving them with friends while I was out and about telling the Great Lakes story. I had written to a number of churches seeking an opportunity for a visit. What I had not factored in was the size of Texas. I received perhaps a dozen invitations from churches all over the broad expanse of the state. And I was driving a car without air conditioning. One of my stops was at Canadian in the Texas Panhandle. There I met a young man who was excited with the prospect of becoming a student that fall in the opening year of Sunset School of Preaching in Lubbock, Texas. His name was Wayford Smith. My memories of the young people coming to GLCC during that time is somewhat of a blur. My activities were more off campus than on, and all the young people came during their teen years regardless of the decade. For administration, I leaned heavily upon my business staff. Building the campus and paying salaries was a constant challenge. In the early 70s, we were 6 months behind in our pay. I remember being cheered by the steady, non-panicking disposition of our board chairman in those difficult times, Oliver Tallman, who served 35 years as chairman of the board. Gradually, the ship was righted, and the books were balanced, and the enrollment reached 200 students, with hats off to Dave Carruthers, who led in recruitment. My annual fundraising trips to Tennessee and Texas were taxing. Nevertheless, some strong friendships were made for the college in these regions. In Nashville, Jim Bill McIntyre, a well-known preacher, took the lead in forming the Eastern Christian Foundation that favored GLCC. He aided the college in another way. A member of the Harding College Board of Directors, he no doubt had a hand in Harding awarding the Honorary Doctor of Laws degree to Eugene Perry and Geoff Ellis in August 14, 1970. Another person of note in Nashville was Roger Church, an insurance salesman. I met him early on during a presentation on behalf of Great Lakes. He approached me after the presentation and said, "I have little money for you. My support is directed to African Christian Schools Foundation." Roger would serve that foundation as chairman for 35 years. "But you are welcome to stay at my home during your visits to Nashville." And thus began a friendship that embraced our families that lasted for many years. Another couple of note was E.A. Bergstrom and his wife Mary. Bergstrom was an officer of the Williams Printing Company, another friend of GLCC. Their bequest made possible the addition of the Oliver and Sadie Tallman Auditorium Gymnasium to the educational building of GLCC in 1977.
What was your experience in full-time ministry?
Well, the province decided to remove grade 13 as part of the high school program in the mid-80s. As grade 13 credits were accepted as freshman credits in the U.S. schools, Great Lakes, with grade 13 credits, along with Bible credits of the 3-year program that we were maintaining, was issuing Associate of Arts degrees that were accepted in the American institutions. So the loss of grade 13 credits meant the end for a time of the Great Lakes Junior College activity. My vision for Great Lakes as a junior college was effectively finished. My 23 years in this role thus came to an end. It was time to do what I had determined as a teenager to do, become a preacher of the gospel full time. I was fortunate to be received by the Waterloo Church of Christ in this full-time role. But 30 years had passed from my finishing college. I was entering the ministry as a middle-aged man, 53 years of age. Adjusting to full-time ministry as a 20-year-old, a mid-20-year-old was one thing. Adjusting to it as a mid-50-year-old was another. The Waterloo Church of Christ at that time was a young congregation. It had been established in the late 1970s, largely because of the vision of Merv Eaton with his wife, Wilda. Living in the Meaford area, Merv had noted that with its two universities, Laurier and Waterloo, the region was a center where the church should be. And his vision took root in the late 70s when his work took him to that area. Bob Hibbard was their first preacher. I was blessed to be invited to be their second, beginning in the fall of 1984. The Waterloo congregation was too small at the time to support a full-time evangelist. Assistance was provided by the Harpeth Hills Church of Christ of Nashville for the next decade. The Waterloo congregation was a young and enthusiastic fellowship, welcoming young people who came to town for university studies. Hispanic believers were numerous in our fellowship, prompting the congregation to add an evangelist to serve that community. Javier Quaresma would serve for nearly a decade. In 98, 99, and 2000, I accompanied Javier Quaresma, fellow evangelist at Waterloo in the Hispanic ministry, to the 14th, 15th, and 16th Encuentro Iberoamericana leadership gatherings. These took place in Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and El Salvador. These were gatherings that Javier, with Santiago Molina, then serving at Strathmore, had initiated. And I spoke at the 99 Dominican Republic gathering. Waterloo was very supportive and accepting in those years. It was a rewarding time for Doreen and me, but in retrospect, the habit of pursuing a number of activities that were only indirectly connected with local preaching, such as education and mission work, no doubt hindered my local ministry. The congregation supported my efforts for 14 years until 1998, when I retired from the Waterloo ministry, and I was 67.
Were you able to extend your educational preparation?
When we moved to Waterloo in the fall of '84, our first residence was King Street, a block and a half away from Wilfrid Laurier University. I discovered that I could enroll in their master's program at the Associated Waterloo Lutheran Seminary. I determined to take a course per term. My first course was reading Revelation in its original Greek language. 2 years went by, and I then learned that ACU was beginning their Doctor of Ministry program, structured to accommodate full-time workers in the field. That appealed to me. And with recent credits earned at Laurier and credits for school for years spent in ministry, I qualified for the Abilene program, and I graduated with a DMin degree in 1990 This time I was the second person to receive Abilene's new advanced degree, Lynn Anderson being number one. Then I learned that I was only 2 courses and a thesis short of completing my Master's of Theological Studies degree program at Laurier. I determined to do this work, completing these requirements and graduating in May of '94. I determined that the thesis work of these 2 programs would contribute insights to the progress of Churches of Christ in Canada. My master's thesis was an inquiry into the growth of the Disciples of Christ in 19th century Ontario, and the D-Min thesis was an inquiry into the growth of Churches of Christ in Ontario.
Did you overcome your hesitancy regarding overseas missions?
Yes, I was able to engage in several overseas missions. Admittedly, these were all short-term missions. In '73, I traveled as an elder on behalf of the Sporting Beamsville Church to visit with the Don Perry family in Shillong, Assam, India. On that trip, I also went to Singapore and taught a short course at the Four Seas Bible College. And from there, I went to Indonesia and visited with my friends Wesley and Beverly Jones and Dave and Lorraine Carruthers. They were missionaries on the island of Java. In 1982, Doreen and I, in a trip that was 30 days around the world, traveled to visit with Roy and Nell Merritt in Bangalore, India, where they were working as missionaries and where I did some teaching. Then we traveled to Papua New Guinea, where there were 17 former staff and students at that time from GLCC, and who were inviting us to visit with them. Then I traveled in the 80s to Glenrothes, Scotland for an evangelistic effort as part of Harpeth Hills, and I would return there shortly to conduct a gospel meeting. Beginning in 1991, I began traveling at Wesley Jones's invitation to work in Finland and Russia. In Finland, we had the opportunity to work with Tim Tucker, a partially handicapped American preacher, formerly a Lipscomb teacher. He had been badly stung in a field of nettles that debilitated him. In Finland, I held several gospel meetings, and one summer led a group of York College students on a short-term mission in Finland and Russia. Wesley was working with World Christian Broadcasting in Russia, where he found evidence of an independent Russian restoration-like effort beginning in 1874. This movement had blossomed in the early years of the 20th century, benefiting from the leadership of Ivan Prokhanov. Wesley invited me to join with him in researching this development, with Tim Tucker assisting in the first year. Our first week in Leningrad, soon to revert to its original St. Petersburg, was truly magical. We then arrived in Moscow the next week, August 19th, in time to witness the coup that was to mark the beginning of the dissolution of the USSR. Nevertheless, amazingly, we received that week a recently published book of the history of the Gospel Christian Baptists that covered the history that we were researching. Subsequent trips to Russia, 5 in all during the 90s, took us to Irkutsk on Lake Baikal in eastern Siberia, and to Arkhangelsk on the White Sea. That effort led to the publishing in 1986 by Wesley and me of the book The Other Revolution, Russian Evangelical Awakenings by the ACU Press in 1996. And this book was also published in Russian. I returned to Russia in 2001 to teach 16 Russian evangelists a short course on evangelism. In 1998 and 2000, I traveled to Ukpum in the Akwa Ibom state in Nigeria to the Nigerian Christian Bible College. There on each trip, I participated in the school's graduation ceremonies, lectured for the Nigerian preachers for a week, and taught the college Bible classes to the Nigerian students for a quarter. In the 2000 visit, I distributed the attending preachers 150 copies of Everett Ferguson's then new work, The Church of Christ, A Biblical Ecclesiology. In 2001, I was invited by Roger Church of Nashville to accompany him on a trip to Southern Africa, where he would say farewell to friends he had made over the years in his African mission efforts. We visited South Africa, Swaziland, that's now Eswatini, and Namibia. As well, we traveled to Victoria Falls, touching Botswana and Zimbabwe, and on up into Zambia. Roger passed in January the next year, and I was invited to deliver his eulogy in Nashville. Then in 2002, I accompanied graduates from Great Lakes Christian College on a short-term mission in Swaziland at the campus of Mancini Bible School, where I taught several classes in the school during the 6 weeks I was there, and the young people, Angie Bailey, Heidi Halls, and Wes Kuruluk, remained for 3 months.
What was your involvement with Great Lakes Bible College?
From ceasing its activity in 1993, the Bible College remained inactive for the following 2 years. I, for one, was concerned that an extended closure might result in the province removing its charter. I approached Arthur Ford, then president of GLCC, in 1995 and proposed the reopening of Great Lakes Bible College with its own board on a campus in Waterloo. This was accomplished in 1996. Dave Knutson agreed to return to teaching Bible courses, and that enabled the school's reactivation. The campus was and is in facilities of the Waterloo Church of Christ, in 2 portables for library and classes. I served as dean until 2001 and was succeeded by Dave Knutson. I continued to teach until 2015. The Bible College has now continued for 27 years from its reopening in 1996. Enrollment is now averaging 40 students per year, mainly online with a full-time teaching equivalent of about 7, also with students currently from the Philippines, Kenya, and the U.S. Paul Burston, Dean, and Nathan Brown, current teachers, both hold their PhDs.
Please describe your experiences with the Canadian Churches of Christ Historical Society.
In 1999, an interest developed that spread to the 3 branches of the Restoration Movement in Canada: Disciples of Christ, Christian Church, and Churches of Christ. This was the possibility of gathering our respective historical records. It was determined that each group wished to develop its own society, And it turned out that the Churches of Christ was the only one of the three to realize this goal. The Churches of Christ Historical Society was begun in 2000. Claude Cox of Barrie took the lead in all of this and served as board chairman through 2005 or 2006. An attempt was made during this period to locate the collection at McMaster University, but this did not work out. Serving as the second board chairman in either 2005 or 6, I, with the help of Eileen Dale, began to process our historical materials in my basement. I noted that then 75% of the material received had originated in the records collected by Eugene Perry and his mother, Grace Stewart Perry, previously. The collection was moved to Meaford in 2012 in facilities made available to the collection by Ron Knight. Roy and Edith Williams cared for the collection there. When the facility was no longer available, Dave Crothers, then chairman, secured the offices on the second floor of McPhee Hall on the Great Lakes campus for the collection and led the drive that raised the $30,000 necessary for this move. The collection was moved to Beamsville August the 24th, 2019. During that time, Lorraine Crothers made major progress in processing the collection, securing the assistance of Shannon Turpin, gratis, that made possible the loading of the archives index on the Society's website. More recently, Myrna Perry has taken on overseeing the collection's development that is now approaching 5,000 items. When Dreen and I downsized in 2019, I moved 11 drawer filing cabinets. Beth reminded me that it was Brent who moved it in his old Ford truck, but nevertheless, that's another matter, to the basement of the Gibson or Perry Hall, to the former student center that had become a drop-off zone for whomever with whatever. There at my leisure, I sorted through the files, saving 4 cabinets full for the Historical Society and sending the rest to the Grimsby dump.
What are your thoughts on the future of Churches of Christ in Canada?
During my days at GLCC, I became aware of a saying that was circulating: if you want a strong church, have a strong school. In fact, this was a mantra that was popular at my alma mater in Texas. I knew that the very opposite was indeed the truth. If you want a strong school, have a strong church. That was the ultimate service to be rendered by GLCC. But were the priorities of the school taking over? Could support for and recognizing the value of Great Lakes take the lead rather than the primacy of the church? I was confident that few, if any, consciously advocated for this, yet the destinies of each seemed intertwined. In 1980, I began a decadal survey for the Gospel Herald of Churches of Christ in Canada. The 1980 results showed a vigorous advance in size and work of Churches of Christ during the previous period. The 1990 results showed a slowing of growth, and the 2000 study indicated that decline had set in, and COVID's impact certainly was negative. For a nation that came close to establishing a national church in 1925, today less than 1/2 of its population expresses any form of commitment to Christianity. Our future in these provinces, school or no school, is uncertain. Nevertheless, while declining in North America and Europe, the faith is booming in the rest of the world. And I take encouragement in knowing that the kingdom of Jesus Christ will prevail no matter what.
What stands out in your mind regarding your life in ministry?
In retrospect, I became increasingly aware that its unfolding was not shaped by a series of smart decisions on my part, but rather because of being confronted by multiple open doors for service and adventure. It was a life full of blessing.
Geoff, thank you so much for your time today. And do you have a final thought that you would like to leave us with?
To God be the glory.
Amen. Thank you for watching this first episode of Living Legacies, brought to you by the Canadian Churches of Christ Historical Society. Be sure to watch for more as we interview other significant people in the fellowship of the Canadian Churches of Christ.